and welcome to the Watchman. Well, in recent weeks, we've told you why the nuclear deal the Obama administration and other world powers have struck with Iran is so dangerous, not only for Israel, but for America. Folks, where to begin? The Iranians have weeks to prepare for each inspection of their nuclear sites. They also get to keep their nuclear research and most of their nuke infrastructure. Oh, they're permitted to continue developing intercontinental ballistic missiles that could one day reach America, and they refuse to release U.S. citizens who are languishing unjustly in Iranian jails. What else? Well, they receive at least $100 billion in sanctions relief, a nice chunk of which will go to funding Hamas and Hezbollah. Bank on it. The list goes on and on. But whether you agree with this deal or disagree with it, one thing we can all agree on is that the Iranian regime wants to destroy Israel and would gladly do so if they had the capabilities. Right? Wrong. Secretary of State John Kerry disagrees. He helped broker the nuclear deal with Iran, and he recently gave an interview to the Atlantic magazine in which he cast doubt on whether Iran really wants to destroy Israel. The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg writes that Kerry does not endorse a view widely shared by Israelis and by many Americans that Iran's leaders, who have often said that they seek the destruction of Israel, mean what they say. I think they have a fundamental ideological confrontation with Israel at this particular moment, Kerry said. Whether that translates into active steps to, quote, wipe it off the map, I don't have the answer to that. I haven't seen anything, Kerry said, that says to me, look, they've got 80,000 rockets in Hezbollah pointed at Israel, and any number of choices could have been made. They didn't make the bomb when they had enough material for 10 to 12. They've signed on to an agreement, Kerry continued, where they say they'll never try and make one, and we have a mechanism in place where we can prove that. So I don't want to get locked into that debate. I think it's a waste of time here, said our Secretary of State. A waste of time to debate whether Iran wants to wipe our closest ally, Israel, off the map. Just a waste of time. Folks, Kerry's ignorance, his complete indifference to Iran's ideology and strategy is nothing less than a severe dereliction of duty in his role as Secretary of State. If Secretary Kerry had a shred of intellectual curiosity and any desire at all to actually know the enemy, first rule of war, folks, he would know that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, recently published a book called Palestine, in which he reiterated Iran's intention to destroy Israel. He even laid out a strategy to do so. It involved incremental steps, attacking Israel bit by bit through proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah. Khamenei's strategy, according to the New York Post, involves a long period of low-intensity warfare designed to make life unpleasant, if not impossible, for a majority of Israeli Jews so that they leave the country. But once Iran gets the bomb, that timetable and that strategy obviously change. And not for the better if you live in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. Folks, ignorance, especially willful ignorance, has consequences. And America's current leadership is making policies that endanger not only Israel and our Arab allies, but the United States. Elections, by the way, also have consequences. Well, shifting gears a bit to Jerusalem, where a visiting delegation of U.S. congressmen was recently harassed by a group of Muslim men in a shocking incident while visiting the Temple Mount. The trip was organized by our friends at the Israel Allies Foundation, and I recently sat down with their Washington director, E.J. Kimball, to get a first-hand account of what went down on the Temple Mount. Take a look. Well, E.J., thanks so much for joining us, my friend.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, and we're big supporters of the Israel Allies Foundation on this show, as you know. Well, you were showing me the itinerary for this great Middle East trip you did with a delegation of U.S. congressmen recently. But I think a lot of great things came out of it. The congressman met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Yalon in Israel. You made a trip to Egypt. But one of the big stories that came out of it was the harassment of a delegation of U.S. congressmen on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. You were there, you were leading the delegation. EJ, set the scene for us and describe what happened.
Sure. Well, we had a fantastic trip, as you mentioned, and really the part that was probably supposed to be the least interesting part from a media standpoint was going to the Temple Mount. We got to the Temple Mount entrance for the non-Muslims to go up through the Israeli checkpoint, and there were some religious Jews, long side locks, wearing some identifying features, yarmulkes, and they were sitting there on a bench.
And this is the holiest place in Judaism, by the way.
Yes,
the Temple Mount is the place, yeah.
So they were actually sitting on a bench while we were going through the security, and the congressman said, "Why are they sitting on the bench?" So I explained to them that because of how they look, being very outward appearance of being Jewish, that if they go up to the Temple Mount, they'll be harassed by the Muslims up on the Temple Mount.
In the holiest place of Judaism.
Yes, under Israeli sovereignty, and they need a police escort, and so they have to wait until about 10-20 minutes before the end of the visiting time so that the police can sort of take them up there quickly. I said, but we have nothing to worry about because look at us. So we get up to the Temple Mount, and the moment we walk on the Temple Mount, there are members of the Waqf, the Muslim authorities who administer the Temple Mount. They don't have control. The Israeli police have control there. Immediately start harassing us because one of the congressman's wives, Mrs. Jenkins, is wearing a nice long sleeve, long dress down to her ankles and a shirt. And they said that it wasn't modest enough. And they start harassing us. Another individual in the
group. A delegation of U.S. congressmen.
Yes. Now
the audacity.
Yes. Now I will say,
and how big was your group, by the way?
We were a total of 9 people up there, everyone included, and they did not know that there were U.S. congressmen there.
Yeah, Trent Franks from Arizona. Who else was there with you?
Evan Jenkins from West Virginia.
Okay.
And Keith Rothfuss from Pennsylvania.
Okay. Distinguished members of the U.S. Congress.
Yes, and members of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus. Trent Franks is a co-chair of our caucus. So we got up there. We were being harassed that they wanted. This is a holy place. You need to be dressed more modestly, and they're harassing us. The police were involved at that point, and our tour guide said, "Look, we've done nothing wrong. You're fine. Don't worry." And then we eventually were able to sort of start our visit on the Temple Mount. Then, after another maybe 10 minutes or so, we worked our way over to another area where our tour guide was explaining the history of the Temple Mount, and he's showing us a map of Israel. And a person cleaning up there, drives his vehicle towards us, stops it, leaves it running, and then goes and tells another person, hey, they're showing a map. This other person, plain clothes, comes over and starts questioning what our guide's showing. And that lasts for a few minutes. And then finally he stops, and now there's 2 people watching us, one person recording. And as he's showing us some more maps, then the Waqf comes back over, the
Islamic authorities,
yes, with their white shirts on, with their walkie-talkies, which they seem to be speaking to each other because you could keep hearing the feedback as they're speaking into it. And they start questioning the guide over what are you showing, and some of the things they were saying was, are you talking about the temple? There was no temple here. There was never a temple. You cannot mention that there was a temple.
There's never a Jewish temple where the Temple Mount stands, where the Western Wall is today, obviously.
And don't let facts interrupt a good narrative, but we saw some of the documents back in the 30s and 40s when the Waqf would actually say that this is the site of where the 2 temples
They used to admit it, yes.
Before it became inconvenient.
Yeah, this was acknowledged historical fact. And folks, this shows you what we're up against right now with the distortion of facts going on in the ground right now in Israel, and driven not only by Hamas and the jihadists, but by the Palestinian Authority as well, and the Waqf, obviously, on the Temple Mount. EJ, tell us where we can find more about the Israel Allies Foundation. And real quick, what was the congressman's reaction to all of this? It seemed like they handled it very well. You handled it very well. But it's unfortunate that it happened. But an eye-opener as well, I think, for people.
Yes, it certainly was an eye-opener. The congressmen were disappointed, resolute, they weren't being intimidated. They also, we had talked about it after the initial incident, that we're doing nothing wrong and that they're just trying to intimidate and make non-Muslims feel unwelcomed on the Temple Mount. That's their purpose. You can get more information on our website at israelallies.org.
EJ, keep it up. Keep going to the Temple Mount.
We will.
Keep it up, man. Very bold, and what you're doing is very important. So thank you, my friend.
Hey, my pleasure.
Appreciate it. Anytime. And after the break, coming back, speaking of Israel, with our good friend Chris Mitchell. He's here in D.C. We brought him over from Jerusalem, talking about his new book, Destination Jerusalem. You don't want to miss this. Stick around. And welcome back. Well, my next guest needs no introduction to CBN News or Watchman viewers. My good friend Chris Mitchell is here with us all the way from Jerusalem, where he is CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief. He's also author of a great new book, a must-read book, folks, called Destination Jerusalem. He's here to talk about it with us today. Chris,
hey,
welcome.
Eric, great
welcome
to be with you.
D.C. I'd rather be in Jerusalem with you, believe me.
So would I, but this is great to be with you.
This is second fiddle.
Yeah.
But, well, look. Dateline Jerusalem, a great book. Your first book was a hit.
Yeah.
We did a whole episode here on The Watchman about it. So Destination Jerusalem, the long-awaited follow-up, it's doing very, very well. So tell us about it, Chris. Destination Jerusalem, what's it all about?
Well, I wrote it, Eric, after I came back from Kurdistan back about a year ago in June and then in August, right after ISIS took over Mosul, which is ancient Nineveh, and many Christians had to flee for their lives, the Yazidis as well. So after I had those experiences, I felt I needed to write the book for three reasons. First of all, to tell people about ISIS and what their true agenda is. For example, we were in a refugee camp and we sat down with a former Iraqi soldier named Shah Alan, who worked in intelligence, interrogated many ISIS prisoners, and he said they want to take over Iraq, Syria, Europe, and eventually the U.S. So they have a global agenda. So I wanted people to know that. Also to tell people about the Christians who were persecuted, who were given four choices. They could leave their homes, they could pay the jizya tax for infidels, or they could convert, or they could finally die. And so people I felt needed to know what their plight was. And finally, to tell people about preparing for the days ahead. You know, the days in the Middle East especially dangerous, but that's coming over here to the United States. It's sort of the new normal with these quote-unquote lone wolf attacks. People need to be prepared for what's happening, and those are the three reasons why I wanted to write the book.
Yeah, that's part of the subtitle of the book, actually.
Yeah, exactly. ISIS, Convert or Die, Christian Persecution, and Preparing for the Days Ahead.
Yeah, and in terms of preparing for the days ahead and the jihadist threat coming here, we've seen it Chattanooga, Garland, Texas, etc. Tell us more, Chris, about your experiences on the ground in Iraq. You filed some fascinating reports for the 700 Club for CBN News. You got, if I'm not mistaken, when you were with the Kurds, the Peshmerga, very close to ISIS and kind of the front lines. Tell us about
Almost
that.
closer than I expected. And, for example, we were in a small village just outside of Kirkuk, and we were with an Iraqi police chief and as well as some Peshmerga. We just found out there were two bombs that had gone off. Two policemen had been killed. They were rounding up suspects. We watched them across the street being rounded up. The police chief said we're about a kilometer away from ISIS. And that was sort of we're not in Kansas anymore moment. What are we going to do? They almost attacked them but decided not to. And instead we followed them to one of their checkpoints right across from ISIS. About a mile down the road you could see a bridge, and that's where the first checkpoint for ISIS was. But we also went on a house-to-house search in a small village just outside their checkpoint looking for suspects. They were volunteering, that were collaborating with ISIS. And they discovered one from Saudi Arabia and one from Sudan.
Clearly foreign fighters coming into Iraq.
It was my first sort of face-to-face moment with jihad. And it's kind of a eye-opening moment when you see that this is real. This is people from all over the Middle East that are coming to fight with ISIS. Really something that we need to... The West needs to take advantage, take note of, and combat it.
Yeah, and a sign of the times. And folks, this is throughout Chris's book, Destination Jerusalem, these riveting first-hand accounts. Chris has been on the ground from Egypt to Iraq and beyond throughout the Middle East, so you really want to pick it up. Chris, we have about 30 seconds before the break. I want to talk about the Iran deal with you after the break, which I know you get into Iran a little bit in the book. Real quick, first reaction to this Iran deal.
I mean, it's really going to change the Middle East. And ironically, you have Israel and Saudi Arabia as allies right now against Iran. And that tells you somewhat about this deal.
Yeah, well, much more coming up about the deal and about Destination Jerusalem with our good friend Chris Mitchell, CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief. Stick around. Much more to come. And welcome back. We're talking to Chris Mitchell, our good friend, straight from Jerusalem here to Washington, D.C. He is CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief and the author of a great new book, folks. I can't recommend it strongly enough, Destination Jerusalem. So, Chris, the Iran nuclear deal, we talked about it a bit before the break.
Sure.
Like you said, strange bedfellows with Israel and the Saudis, kind of seeing the threat and the region the same right now. You're in Israel, you live in Israel, you've been there for 15 years, you're on the ground. Right. What is the reaction from the Israeli public to this Iran deal?
Well, we were on the streets of Jerusalem. We talked to a number of people that right after the deal was made, and they feel like they're on the front lines. And they have known from experience to do two things. First of all, they don't trust Iran. And second of all, they take them at their word when they say death to Israel and death to America. Because, as you've said many times, they see Israel as the little Satan and the U.S. as the great Satan. And so Israelis take this very seriously. And in terms of military, Defense Minister Ya'alon says, they go on the premise that they can't trust Iran. The IDF Chief of Staff has already set up a team as a possible military option, what to do. And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has been talking and warning the world about nuclear Iran for years.
And the world, if Israel does feel compelled to act preemptively to protect itself, the world will howl. I'm sure.
They definitely will.
And it remains to be seen how, if it happened under this current administration, how the Obama administration would react.
One of the aspects of the treaty, it actually says that the P5+1 will serve as sort of guarantors or protectors of Iran's nuclear facilities from sabotage. Now, what country has been accused of sabotage more than any other against Iran's nuclear facilities is Israel.
It's amazing. So that's a key point, Chris. It really is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it really is. And I agree. Because it puts the U.S. and the world powers sort of protecting Iran against Israel. It's hard to believe.
We are essentially the bodyguards for the world's #1 state sponsor of terror against our closest ally in the Middle East. It's really a world turned upside down.
Yeah.
It truly is. Well, we have the Jewish people have a bullseye on their back in the Middle East, obviously.
Right.
But the Christians of the Middle East have a bullseye on their back. Chris, you've been on the front lines, the cutting edge of that issue as well, jihadist persecution of Christians.
Right.
Tell us some of the latest rumblings in that area in the Middle East. Hopefully, is there any positive news for the believers in the Middle East?
Well, there's not much positive news. There's a little. The dire news is the fact that because of ISIS, well over 100,000 Christians have fled Mosul, Karakush, many of those Christian villages, now living as refugees in parts of Kurdistan with no necessarily prospect of getting a job, making any money, starting a new livelihood. And there is, rumblings of the beginnings of maybe relocating some of these Christians to different countries. It's a very small effort right now, but hopefully that's something positive against something what many people have called a genocide against Christians as well as Yazidis and other ethnic groups.
What, with the Kurds, you spent time with the Kurds on the ground, obviously. What is your impression of the Kurds? Because a lot of people here in the States, me included, I've said, hey, why don't we get behind the Kurds? These guys are fierce fighters. They're pro-American. What were your impressions on the ground with the Peshmerga?
Oh, it was amazing to be with them.
And this is all in the book, too.
Exactly. We talk a lot about that, being on the front lines with the Peshmerga, and I think the Kurds are our natural allies. And what's happening, what they said then, and actually what they're saying today, is to give us the heavy weapons that we need to fight ISIS. Ironically, ISIS is better armed because they've taken over many of the weapons that the Iraqi army had after they fled, supplied by the United States. And over time, the Kurds have kept saying, please give us those weapons. But right now, Washington continues to insist that any weapons that go to the Kurds have to go through Baghdad. And if they go through Baghdad, they're not making it to the Kurds.
And you had a great reception from the Peshmerga.
Oh, yeah, they were great. I mean, to be on the front lines with them and to see that they are brave, they are loyal, and they're the boots on the grounds, on the front lines, sort of the tip of the spear against ISIS.
Wow. Well, this is all of these riveting accounts, folks, are in Chris's book, Destination Jerusalem. I strongly encourage you to pick it up. And Chris, if you don't mind, We're going to bring it back after the break for some quick words of encouragement and what this all means for believers and prophetically. So some final thoughts with our good friend Chris Mitchell after the break. Stay tuned. And welcome back. We're wrapping up with Chris Mitchell, author of Destination Jerusalem. Chris, first of all, it's a great book. Second of all, it can be heavy subject matter,
sure.
but I think one of the great things about the book is you give words of encouragement, and also you give us a sense of what this all means prophetically. So if you could share that with our viewers right now.
Well, I think one thing the book tries to do is describe where we are right now. Two authors, I think, describe the days we're living in. Charles Dickens said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And the prophet Isaiah said, "Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord has risen upon you, but deep darkness the peoples." It's a time of great light and great darkness, and I think part of the book is designed to help people, encourage people that if these are the days that we're living in, how should we then live? Like Francis Schaeffer said many years ago, we need to watch and pray. We need to draw close to the Lord, close to our families, close to our churches, and I think that's part of what we need to do. The good news, too, coming out of the Middle East, there is good news. Muslims are coming to Jesus Christ, faith in Him like never before in the 1400-year history of Islam, many of it through internet, satellite, and also supernaturally through dreams and visions. That's one of the amazing things that I think is going on in the Middle East. We talk about that in the book, and I think that's one of the encouraging signs. In the midst of darkness, the Holy Spirit is still moving, and it's a time to be praying for the peace of Jerusalem, praying for what's happening in the Middle East, and praying for the future, that we can be prepared for the days to come.
Chris, thank you so much. A great message, great word, my friend. Thank you for that encouragement. And folks, you have to pick up the book Destination Jerusalem, #1. #2, check out Dateline Jerusalem, Chris's award-winning CBN News show, or Jerusalem Dateline, I'm sorry. The book, your first book, Dateline Jerusalem. While you're at it, pick that up as well. You can find them both on Amazon.com. Until next week from the Watchman, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.